All right. Hello, Miss Early. We are here with our group. I am Sarah. I will be starting off today. We're going to be talking about age of acquisition and how that plays into second language acquisition. Alrighty, I'm going to share my quizzes in the chat if y'all want to pop into that. And I'll share my screen too. As well. Alrighty, I'm gonna start it here. Okay. Let me know. Did y'all get that? Could y'all pull that up?
Oh, I didn't. I can now.
Okay. I'm gonna put this bar E up here. Okay.
Oh, so I have to join like this?
Show answer.
Oh wait, are y'all in there?
Hey!
Are y'all in there? Oh.
Yes, I'm in there.
Oh, okay. That's
I'm
okay.
not. Sorry, 1 second.
Well, I don't know exactly how quizzes, I've never actually like used it live.
Okay.
I think you can do it on your own and then, or you could do it like, I don't know if y'all can see mine, if y'all have mine up. I don't know. Never mind. Okay.
No, I see it.
Okay, join game. I see. So 8, 9, 7, 9.
Oh, I just pasted the link. Oh well.
Yeah, I think there's 2 options. Also, sorry, my dog is barking.
Okay.
I think that's the thing I had this morning.
Okay, I'm in. There's me.
Okay.
Hold
on, let me see. Let me get. I've got it, but I don't.
I think
I have it from the link.
Yeah,
so let me.
The link.
So what if you do it on your phone? I think that might be better.
My daughter has my phone. Oh no.
Oh,
okay.
Sorry.
Hold on. Let me do this again. This is the same problem we had this morning. Hold on. Where am I? Okay, let's try this. Oh, here we go. So let me do this. Hold on.
If you want, I can read out the code for you.
Let me open up a new tab. Okay, so let's do this. Enter a join code 897947.
Yeah.
Okay. Good deal.
All right.
There
okay,
she is.
Okay, let's go ahead and start.
Ooh, timing.
I don't know. Can y'all hear that?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
It's loud. Okay, I'm gonna turn it off on my end. Okay.
Wait. Oh, I have to answer a question. Shoot. Okay.
Oh, aha. So the first question. Oh, I forgot you can kind of take it at your own pace. I think.
Okay.
Right? Oh, this is a train wreck. Anyway, I forgot this was like this and it didn't go question by question because I wanted to talk after each question.
Uh-oh.
But it's okay.
I can wait.
No, it's okay. So like, where are y'all right now on like?
I'm on question 2, but I can wait. But I don't know if the questions are mixed up per person.
I think they are because I just got the study one about the Dutch, the naturalist acquisition by Dutch.
Okay.
I haven't answered it yet, but
How about y'all just take the quiz and then we can talk about it after. We can talk about the questions after.
Okay.
Yeah, it might be all. Except one of them's a poll. Okay. This isn't going as smoothly as I wanted it.
That's okay.
It's okay.
Okay. Oh crap! I got that wrong.
Oh
no!
I'm cheating.
Hey, that's not fair. You can't cheat.
Okay, I won't cheat, but I forgot.
I know, me too.
It's okay. This is a safe space. We can talk it out.
I forgot which one the left brain and the right brain is. See, I always forget.
Okay, I gotta read these very slowly. Okay.
Oh, bingo.
Oh, I don't know. I feel like I'm like, oh, I got it right. Woohoo!
I don't know. Maybe this one.
I was
Let's try that one.
nervous. She's kicking my butt.
Hey, I got it.
An implicit, true or false? Older SLA. No, false.
Understanding.
I like all your little funny like things afterward. That's funny.
Yeah.
I don't know if I got that. I think I got that right. I don't know. Social, emotional.
Where is it?
Oh, I got it wrong.
No, that's
Choose
not it.
wisely. Oh gosh, this is scary.
Oh, here we go. No, that's not it. I know I read that. I just don't remember where I read that. See, this is why it takes us so long to.
Are you talking about the adolescent or like the Dutch question? That's what
Yeah.
Me too. I'm on that one too. I'm like, oh shoot, I can't remember. I'm gonna assume it's this. Oh, I got it wrong.
Oh, where is it? Foot, because I know I just had it. What did I do with it? Oh well, I'm just gonna have to guess because I don't remember. I remember reading it.
Okay, I finished mine.
All right. Oh, I think I. Oh no, I did know that one. I knew that one anyway. See, I did read.
Okay. So we have all of our questions in. Alrighty, let's see. Robyn, first place. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And let's go over the questions. So let's start with this first one, or the one I intended to be first. So, which of the following is true considering second language acquisition? Y'all both got this right. The answer was none of these. All of these statements are based off of a child's first language acquisition, like comparing an adult second language acquisition versus a child's first, taking those kind of myths. It's in that beginning of that Brown chapter. And there's been many people that to like talk about this, but one of the first ones I saw in there was studies done by Stern, Cook, and I'm going to mispronounce this, but Schachter. Anyway, saying that, you can't compare the two, although you can take some methods of a child's first language acquisition and apply it to second language acquisition, but you can't really compare the two because I don't have a good reason. I probably should have, but it's just it's an illogical. It would be better to base it off of a child's second language acquisition versus an adult second language acquisition. Like, how is that different? And then so the second one, the functions for the left hemisphere are logical and analytical, and the right emotional and social. So you have your mathy side and your arty side, if you want to like think about it like that. I just thought this one was interesting.
I flipped those. I flipped them.
And it
See, that's the one I cheated on.
It applies. Yeah, it applies because the left hemisphere of your brain also deals with language acquisition, and it was shown that like in children or adolescents that have like brain damage on that side can still, very easily the right side can like take it over. I just thought that was very interesting. And then so this third one, older SLA learners rely more on implicit learning, true or false? I both got that right. That is false. It is explicit learning. I just think that's really important to drive in that, implicit is meaning, you kind of pick it up naturally. And that's how children learn their first or sometimes second language. Already in this one, the Dutch study by Snow and Hoefenhagel so they concluded after their study was over that adolescents were the best acquisitioners, is that a word? And that goes back into like a cognitive consideration of second language acquisition, where Piaget says that puberty, so starting at 11, that age, is the best time for second language acquisition because that's when you start to form, like you start to become capable of like abstract and like formal thinking at that age. So you're more, so when you're a child, you're kind of absorbing things like a sponge just because you don't know anything else, kind of. But when you reach that age of puberty, you're starting to take what you already know and apply it so you can form more critical thinking skills. But you still have that flexibility of, there's another point where they talk about your language ego. So like how you're kind of like comfortable in your first language. And when you're a kid and you're learning a second language, you are more, not apt, but it's easier for you to make mistakes because you wouldn't be as embarrassed as if you were an adult. And I've had the same feeling of like when I don't want to make a mistake, like when I was learning Korean, like I can't make a mistake, I'll be embarrassed. But when you're a kid, you don't really think like that. You're just like, kind of like when you're learning how to ride a bike. It's not scary if you fall down. And then the fifth one, which is the poll. Can I see your poll answers? Okay, both of you said yes and no, which is, I'm glad I included it because at first I was gonna make y'all pick, but then I was like, I'll be nice. Because this is the one I really wanted to discuss a lot. We might get to that later so they had a big chunk in that Brown chapter about accent. And while they didn't really necessarily, they kind of touched on accent in terms of fluency. That whole section was really interesting to me because I have seen some discourse on, can you be considered fluent if you have like such a thick accent that the other person can't understand you? But I wanted to hear y'all opinions on it as too, because I don't think, while accents, like getting a more natural accent is important, I don't really think it's like the most important thing. I don't know. I just thought it was really interesting. And Singleton and Ryan were the two people that I saw in there about that. I'm losing my train of thought.
No, I think you bring up a good point. And let's take like let's take engineers or doctors, somebody who might come from another country to study a very demanding profession, and they come over here to study, let's say doctors, and they may have a very thick accent, but they're in medical school, and so they have to be at least read and write proficiently. Just because they speak with an accent does not mean that they're not literate and can write well. And they have to be able to listen. If a patient says my side hurts, they have to be able to listen and comprehend what the patient's saying, and kind of process it in their mind. So
yeah,
Betsy, what do you think?
I agree. I put yes and no because I think that makes the most sense, because if someone has an accent that's so strong that's getting in the way of people being able to understand them, and it comes down to more of like they're actually just not pronunciating correctly, or like not making the right sounds, and so it just doesn't sound like the word that we're used to hearing, then I think that's a problem, and I don't know how you could say someone's fluent if you can't understand them. But however, I think there's a lot of people that have accents, even in English, talked about that, like we have the British accent versus the like Northern American accent versus a Southern American accent. Like I can understand you guys from the South and you can understand me from the North, even though I don't pronounce everything the same way. And I think it's fair to say you can be fluent and have an accent as long as you are understood by much of the population. I mean, even if you have a word here or there, it's still, people can figure it out with context clues. So I think it matters more about, overall, can you understand what the person's trying to tell you? Are they understood by most learners? Then I would say, they're probably, I think they can be fluent with an accent. I was even just thinking, like watching President Trump's wife speak, Melania. She has a thick accent, but I could understand her speech. I thought she did a great job, actually. I was impressed with how well she spoke. So I guess like that came to my mind when I read that section. I was like, oh yeah, she knows several languages and she has an accent, but she's fluent and you can understand her. But I think
how many, go ahead.
Were you going to ask me how many languages she knows?
No,
I don't know.
No.
Oh.
How many professors in your past have you had, to both of you, with an accent? I had a professor that came from Canada, and she pronounced about a boot. You could tell she was from Canada.
Interesting. Well, so my undergrad was in Spanish, so most of my professors were like Spanish speakers, and a lot of them were native Spanish speakers. So I didn't get to hear them speak English a lot. But I wouldn't be surprised if some of them had like an accent when they spoke English. So, yeah.
Yep, I think it's really interesting, and there's a whole nother like cultural, social thing that comes into it on like biases. So like, are you saying this person is not as smart or not as fluent because they have an accent you don't agree with?
Right.
You know, you could bring that whole like kind of politicize it. Anyway, I just think it was very interesting. And that is my bit. I will turn it over to Betsy, and she will go now.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm really grateful you brought up the accent portion too, just because I didn't touch on that in my presentation, but I thought that was very important and definitely talked about in both readings. So thanks for bringing that up. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. And this week I used Venngage. It's kind of a PowerPoint type application, but it's just a little bit different. On age and acquisition. And I kind of focused on like the part of, does age matter in SLA, second language acquisition. I thought this quote from Douglas Brown was really good in our reading. He says, "It is unfair to compare first language acquisition of a child to the first language acquisition of an adult." Sarah, you kind of hit on this as far as like we should be comparing people to the same age groups and not child to adult necessarily, because that's just a completely different population of people and they learn differently. So we have to be careful when we're looking at those factors. And I kind of wanted to bring that up on the second page here. And I guess my main point that I took away from the reading this week was that second language acquisition is complex and it's difficult to study. So when we look at a lot of these studies, we see these two areas. We see a difference in the way that people learn their first language and their second language. Like, is there differences in methodologies in the way that we should be teaching people a second language? And then we do see a difference with children and adults. So I kind of pulled this quote, another one from Brown, and he says what we have to be careful about is, he says, we end up manipulating the variable of language, first language and second language, as well as age, child, and adult, which is a basic flaw of many of the myths that we believe. So I remember when we did our reading on page 32 from that PDF, he shows like 7 different myths. And I don't know about you, but when I read those myths, I believed many of them. And I was shocked and I kind of felt bad even. And I think that's because of this, we kind of combine these two things and it's not always a very accurate representation and not very accurate study or data. So looking at this, I wrote here, first language acquisition versus second. Much of the second language theories and methodologies have been modeled after first language acquisition. And a big part of that is because second language acquisition is kind of a new science. But we see that it's constantly changing, and we're finding that not all first language teaching methods can be used for second language teaching. It's not always the best. And then looking at child versus adult, we see through our readings that children and adults learn differently, and their brains function and think differently too. And so how can we teach both? Whether we're working with K through 12 or we're working with adults at adult centers or universities, how can we be the most effective? as educators. So the 3 points that I want to make in my presentation, I'm going to start out with critical period hypothesis. This was talked about in both readings, so I feel like it was really important. And the question that this hypothesis is trying to answer is it really true that the younger you are, the better you learn? And we see the two theories that were talked about in the Brown reading was this Wilder Penfield and his co-author Lamar Roberts. So they were kind of the founders of this back in the 50s, almost 60s, 1959. And then Eric Lenneberg, Sarah, you mentioned this a little bit. He studied trauma. I think it was in children, and he looked at the left side of the brain and how even with trauma, they still were able to speak and use language where adults struggled. I think that was his findings. And that was in 1967. So that kind of went back to this critical period hypothesis and supported it. But what is this, right? So the critical period hypothesis is a sensitive period or a biological period for language acquisition. And what it believes, or the people that believe this theory, is that language is acquired more easily, but during this period of time, but afterward, it's much more difficult to acquire language. And due to this thinking, there was a push in incorporating foreign language in education systems quicker. Pre-puberty, basically, right? Was once you start hitting puberty, your brain starts to change and you're not able to pick up second language as fast, and you're always going to have an accent. That was kind of the belief. So through the various studies, it seems to have some validity, but how do we know what constitutes as successful? Like you mentioned this too, like how do we know if someone's fluent? How do we know if they really understand their second language and can, use it well? And I think that kind of goes back to even what you were saying about accents. Do we put too much focus on someone's accent? How do we even know if someone's really acquired a language well? So I think this is a really important point. Something else that was briefly mentioned in both books, both readings that we did, was this Jeannie Wiley, who was this young gal who was kept in captivity basically in her own home for 13 years, and she was neglected. And it's a very sad story if you read up on it. She had no exposure for 13 years to any human language or interaction. She was locked in her own room, and she was like strapped to this like little toilet she just sit on all day long, and she was kept in a cage. And so just a lot of abuse, and a lot of her motor skills were not developed, and it was really sad. But anyway, Curtis was a linguist, and she did a study on this Jeannie Wiley in the 70s, 1977. And she found out through the study, even with her working with her, and there was one other psychologist, child psychologist, that she still fully could not acquire language. And they believed that this really supported the view of this critical hypothesis theory, or I'm sorry, critical period hypothesis. So I wanted to show you just a very short snippet of the video with this linguist, this Curtis. I think it was fascinating, and just kind of some of the findings that they were able to find. So let me pull that up real fast. Can you see this okay? Make it bigger. It's kind of blurry.
I don't see it, Betsy.
Still see your Vengage.
Oh, you do?
Not Vengage. Yeah, Vengage.
You might have to stop sharing and then start sharing again.
Okay, I will. I'll share again. Thank you, guys. Okay, share. Now, can you see this?
Yes.
Okay, I think I'm gonna push back just a bit. All right. Let me know if you can hear it.
No.
No,
Oh,
can't
no.
hear it.
Okay, let me see.
There should be like a thing that, like when you go to share screen, there should be like a little clicky
yeah.
thing that says
I think it says share audio.
Share computer sound. There we go. I bet this is it.
As the experts looked on, they realized that she might be the answer to the question that had troubled science for so long.
So we seized this wonderful opportunity that she provided us in as loving a way as we could, but using it to finally get our chance to address head-on specific hypotheses and notions about human language and the human mind.
These hypotheses were based on the latest ideas about how children's brains developed. According to the theory, young children could only learn certain things at certain times, called critical periods. Language was one of these critical periods, and according to the theory, Jeannie, who was now a teenager, had missed her chance forever. But incredibly, Jeannie seemed to be proving the theory wrong. As this footage shows, Jeannie was blossoming. Not only was she delighted by the world around her, but she was learning the words for the new things she was seeing.
She was extremely interested in everything around her. She wanted to know the word for everything around her. She wanted to engage people all around her. She was not mentally deficient. Her lights were on, and everyone who worked with her, from teachers to therapists to me, knew that she was not retarded. It was clear as day. And as she began to learn more and more words, hundreds of words, much more rapidly than I ever imagined, and stringing them together, I began to think maybe I will be wrong. Maybe she will be the one that will prove that this hypothesis is incorrect.
But Jeannie could not escape the effects of her past so easily. She was still haunted by her traumatic upbringing, trapped by the memories of the awful fate she had suffered. And linguistically, she had stopped making progress.
She learned tons of words. She has an enormous vocabulary. But language is not words. Language is grammar. Language is sentences. How do you make a sentence? What can be a sentence? What is a sentence? How do you automatically know something's a sentence? So it wasn't because she was cognitively deficient. In other respects, it was because she was cognitively deficient in this island of human mind, the mental faculty that we call grammar.
At the time Jeannie was found, brain science was in its infancy. But today, we have a much clearer picture of what actually happens in cases of extreme neglect like Jeannie's.
Yeah. So kind of was very sad, I think. But something that it's a very interesting study. And I think it's not, I don't know, I just think it's like when you look at it, you could really see how at first glance you could say how that supports the critical period hypothesis. But I think the part that even one of the readings talked about was we also have to look at, she was traumatized. And so it wasn't just the language part that she missed out on. She doesn't know social cues. Like she doesn't know how to interact with humans, like at all, because she didn't have that exposure. So a lot of that had to do with probably how she couldn't really learn. So when we look at like adults versus kids, is it really fair to say that they can't learn if they haven't had like a traumatized experience? I don't know. So that was just kind of some of my thoughts on, I think, that theory. So I wanted to bring that to light. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen again so you can see the rest of my PowerPoint presentation. Okay. The next point I wanted to talk about was implicit versus explicit learning theories, and this was the idea that came from Ryan de Keyser in the 2000s, so a little newer theory. And when we look at implicit versus explicit, we can really categorize that based on the learners we're working with too. So implicit learning is the focus of incidental acquisition, so kind of learning by accident or just in person naturally. And studies show that this is the way that children learn best. And this is why that they can learn so quickly. So they end up watching and listening and then outputting that information. And we're seeing that they also don't have the cognitive abilities that adults have since their brains have not matured as much. So the plus side is they learn and they learn pretty well, but as soon as they're taken out of that environment, sometimes they forget things. It's not so concrete. Where with explicit, we see there's this focused attention and learning with instruction. So a lot of classroom learning, and that's where adults learn best. And why does this matter? Well, adults may never be able to sound like a native speaker. They may not even learn as quickly as children, but they really do understand social context and rules, whether that's grammar rules or life rules. And so they bring kind of another element to the table, and they tend to really retain the information where kids may forget it. So I thought that was kind of an interesting theory to look at as well. And again, like, I think having classroom settings, and we have a lot of impact on adult learners. Since this is the way they learn best, like we could really make a difference when we work with them. And lastly, this language ego. So language ego, the definition that the reading gives is it's the identity a person develops in reference to the language he or she speaks. This concept was derived or developed by the psychologist Alexander Guaria, or Guaria, no say. I don't know how to say it. I just said Spanish. We see a difference even with children and adults here. So children, their ego, pertaining to this Alexander, is dynamic, it's growing, it's flexible throughout the stage of their childhood up until puberty. And their ego is not affected when making mistakes. And so they're able to adapt quickly, they don't feel embarrassment, they're less aware of their errors and their language forms, and so they feel less frightened to make the errors. Where with adults, whether these are like adolescents, they've just gone through puberty, they're going through it, they're old, they're adult, they're full grown adults, they tend to be secure in who they are, and then when they're put into a space that they don't feel secure, they don't really like it. So they're afraid to make mistakes, and they sometimes don't even end up speaking very much unless spoken to, unless put into a context that they have to. And I don't know about you guys, I've seen this with my own ELLs in class. They won't really automatically speak up, these adults that I work with, unless I like speak to them or I ask them a specific question, because I think they're fearful to feel embarrassed or just kind of feel stupid, even though no one else views them that way. So I took this slide and even just thought like, hey, how can we apply this, like knowing this knowledge? What can we do to help both children and adults to feel comfortable in learning a second language? And my 3 points were, 1, I think we must remind our learners that it is okay to make mistakes. It is okay. It's just, please make mistakes. And we must encourage them to be brave in the classroom and outside of the classroom. So when adults are going to student conferences for their kids, or they have to go to the grocery store, it's okay that they don't speak perfect English, but they should still try, because they're going to learn in that way. And same with kids. So another idea I had, and I think this may have been from the reading, but I couldn't find it, so I couldn't like cite it. I think we should play games with them, and so like play games to allow them to make a fool out of themselves in class before even beginning the lesson. So everyone starts to feel kind of comfortable in being just kind of goofy and not perfect. So anyway, those are my 3 points. I went longer than I thought I would, but thanks for listening. I'm going to turn this over to Robyn.
Hi. Thanks so much, Betsy, for being so informative. I sure do appreciate that. And I'm going to also kind of piggyback off what Betsy and Sarah said. I'm going to talk about the critical period hypothesis, and also I'm going to talk about language ego, and then also age and rate of acquisition. So let me share I have so many tabs up. Let's see, is that it? That's Dr. Prado. Yes. Okay. So going off what Betsy said, I'm talking about the critical period hypothesis. Oops. And it is the period in which learners can acquire a second language relatively easily. And you see that in Ellis on page 27. The hypothesis states that there is a period typically defined as the period up to the onset of puberty during which learners can acquire a second language easily and implicitly and achieve native speaker competence. But after which second language acquisition becomes more difficult and is rarely entirely successful. So that's kind of going off what Betsy said. It was developed by Penfield and Roberts, and you saw their pictures in Betsy's slideshow. And with the critical period hypothesis, it kind of goes hand in hand with it supports Chomsky's language acquisition device. And this is also on page 27 of Ellis, that innate biologically giving capacity for learning a language. So, Chomsky argues that we all have an innate ability to learn whatever language, and then Penfield and Roberts come in and say, okay, well, our innate ability to learn this language comes between birth and puberty. So I can see how they can go hand in hand. So let's go on. And I'm also going to talk about language ego. And Betsy also touched on this. And it was developed by Alexander Guiara. Is that how
he did better than me? Yeah.
I have no idea. In 1972, and Betsy touched on this as well. And that native language and ego development are tied together. And again, children are very egocentric. They really are not afraid of making a fool of themselves, and so they're able to make a fool of themselves when learning language. And everybody thinks that kids are cute, and they say cute things anyway, so everybody kind of laughs it off. Oh, that's just cute. And that adults are more pensive about making mistakes. And I wrote something down when Betsy was doing her presentation. She mentioned life rules. And I'm thinking, well, you have your language ego, which is you have that implicit learning coming in from being a child. And you said that there was a lack of social rules that children knew. And you have that implicit learning. So I'm thinking, well, if you have, and that adults are better at explicit learning because they also have a knowledge of the rules. And I'm wondering, you have a lack of social rules, and you have that language ego, and you just don't know the rules of life or of language learning, and you really don't care. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And this is in our second reading, Brown. Let me go there. It is on page, yes, it is on page 64 in our Brown reading. Language ego involves the interaction of the native language and ego development. A person's self-identity is inextricably bound up with one language. And I think really when you're talking about social cues and social rules, we know, what social rules we're supposed to engage in and follow, and that just kind of makes us more timid maybe in how we don't want to look like a fool. So yeah, and then also language as a communication device. We can use it to communicate, to barter, the whole social context of language. And our identity, I am a native English speaker. And what does that imply to other people? I am a native Spanish speaker. What does that imply? Or, I'm bilingual, I'm multilingual. Wow, gosh, they must be very smart. Or, wow, they could be positive or negative. Oh, that person's very smart. He or she can speak multiple languages. Or, gosh, I wonder what bad situation in Central America did they come from? And I'm just using that as an example, and I don't mean to offend anybody when I use that as an example. Okay, so so native language and ego development are tied together. The egocentrism of children yields higher absorption of language, and we kind of touched on that already. The age of language acquisition and accent, and this is what Sarah touched on a little bit. She really mentioned accent, and Brown also mentioned accent a lot. We talked about implicit learning and native accent, that children are better at developing a native accent. And is it because they learn implicitly, they learn just by all that absorption, that they don't have kind of any not precognitive, but prejudged that's not the right word, but that pre-language, they already know a language and they're basing their second language off their first language.
Preconceived.
Preconceived. Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. Thank you. And then the rate of acquisition. This was, and Betsy talked about this by Snow and Herfnagel Hobel. I have no idea. I'm looking at that OE. I think that's a sound in German. I'm not sure. In 1978. And it's, and it was about the rate of language acquisition. And this was on page, let's see, was it on page 33? Yeah, here it is. Page 33. The naturalistic acquisition of Dutch. And that was also in Sarah's quizzes. The formal learning situations, adults actually seem to do better in children. And I think that goes back to that explicit learning, rules, these are the rules for your regular verbs. These are your rules for your irregular verbs. These are the rules for how you use a preposition. These are just, the grammar rules and how you set up your English. And I think adults, they have that explicit instruction, and cognitively they're better able to understand how rules work in life and in grammar. So I thought that was interesting. Do adults perform better at cognitive learning? They do. It was the explicit learning strategies that really caught me, and about cognitive learning, about thinking about how we learn. And again, it was going back to, knowing the rules. So what is the takeaway from all this? Adults can learn a language, and their accent, even though it's very heavy, sometimes adults can learn a language very, very fluently. I think that we need to have a combination of implicit and explicit learning for adults, and even for children. I think we need to have a combination of implicit and explicit learning, and really it's a lot of common sense. It really is. So that's it for me. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, Robyn. I have many things to say about both of your presentations. I really enjoyed them. I've been taking little notes. So let's get into the discourse on what we think are our 5 main points. But first, there's 2 things I want to touch on. One thing is about what you just said, Robyn, concerning adults versus children, like that Snow, Hogan, those people, about how adults or adolescents are better than children. And you said something about, adults can learn more explicitly, they can learn those grammar rules. This touches on what we talked about this morning with Dr. Harrison and
Yes.
the 1.5 generation, or
Yes.
multinational language learners,
Yeah.
on how they can speak. Typically, I'm not saying this is a generalized, typically they can speak and communicate really well orally, but then they don't have the written and reading grammatical aptitude as, say, just an adult learner. So Betsy, generation 1.5 would be, I don't know if you're familiar, but that would be the generation that their parents have immigrated into, let's just use America, for example. So they immigrated to America and were either born here or were very young. So they grew up in, this is just an example. They grew up in a Spanish-speaking household, but then the whole rest of the world is English-speaking. And their parents might not have been English speakers. So all of their English knowledge is coming second, not from their parents, it's coming from them. So that's what this generation 1.5 is. I can't remember the exact term that Dr. Harrison, or
Yes, it
Ms.
was
Harrison
some long.
It was very long, because generation 1.5 isn't really,
it's kind of a pejorative term
a good
now.
way to say it.
Oh.
Yeah, it's kind of outdated. But anyway, I just thought that was a very interesting point to bring up, because even though they came here as children, you would think if you're making the argument that children are better language learners, well, there's a good example of they might be good speakers, but they're
not good writers.
Yeah, they're not.
Mhm. Mhm.
I just really wanted to bring that up before.
Yeah, that's really good. I had something kind of along the same lines I was thinking as Robyn was presenting, and she was talking about the explicit versus implicit. And I do think it's important, like when I'm thinking, because I'm very interested in adults, so that kind of comes up a lot, like even in my presentations, just that's who I'm working with, that's who I want to work with. But yeah, I think sometimes you can feel discouraged because you just think, man, am I ever going to get them to a place where they feel confident and they're understood by a lot of people, and that they are fluent or close to it. And I think having that explicit, knowing that they're good at explicit learning and like helping them in the classroom is so good. But I think, yeah, taking them outside of the classroom and putting them in situations, or just encouraging them, hey, when you are put in this situation, let's see how you do. Do you have questions when you come back? Like, how can I help you for the next time when you have that scenario again? Because I don't know what you guys, but like I've had with a lot of my gals that I work with, they say, I just don't know what to ask or say in student conferences. Like when the teachers are talking to me, I just don't know how to respond. Like, I just want to know how to respond, you know? But yeah, it still comes back to, yeah, but we need to teach them some of these rules, because otherwise how are they going to going to be able to express it, you know?
Betsy, do you do a lot of role playing when you do that?
I don't, but I was thinking I need to do more of that. I was just thinking that like this week, I'm like, I need to do more of that with them. So that was just kind of another thought. Yeah, I don't know if we want to start thinking about some of those points. I do think the critical period hypothesis still has credibility. I think there is something to be said about it. I mean, even though it was developed in the 60s, I feel like it still plays a part today. And just
I
our
think
school
that
systems.
just the fact that it's mentioned in both, we're still talking about it. And then the fact that it's mentioned in both texts shows that it's validity, really.
Right. Yep. So I don't know if it's at the top. I don't know if I count it at the top, but I think it's definitely one of our points.
Yeah.
So critical period.
Language ego.
I can't relate this to an exact point, but I remember hearing it in Robyn's presentation that typically we think of adult learners learning slower than children. Like, it's a general, this is just a myth. This came from like one of the first readings for this class. It's one of the myths was that, you know, children are better language learners than adults. And people say like, oh, well, kids just pick it up faster. Well, if you think about when a child learns their first language, they're not really literate until like 5 or 6. That's 6 years. It takes a kid 6 years to be able to form like complete coherent sentences and like be able to start reading and writing. That was short, you know.
Yeah, that was
that's true.
Crashing. And let me see, y'all talk. Let me pull that up. But that's his natural approach that he mentioned that, and he also mentioned going back to the input hypothesis. You know, children listen before you output. So you can talk while I look that up. Let's see.
Well, and actually you make a good point. I think I might have even misspoke in my presentation about that, because it actually talks about one of our readings too that we read. It's not that actually children learn faster than adults. Like, they actually say adults at first learn very quickly, because they understand process. But it's just over time,
long term.
That's when you start to see the children kind of surpass adults,
right?
And their quickness, and that they pick up the language. So I might have actually said that in my presentation, not quite the way I should have, but so I think that's good that you brought it up.
I also wrote a note here, and now I can't remember what it's supposed to mean, but I wrote accent in terms of aptitude. I think what I was trying to get at was when we talk, I remember. So we're talking about accent, and like, can we connect how good your accent is versus fluency? I feel like, and a lot of the arguments I saw in both texts were like, you know, if you're an adult learner, your accent's never going to be perfect. Like you're always going to have like a foreign accent. Well, not necessarily, because people have different aptitudes of learning. You know what I mean? So I know personally adult learners who started as adults, and if you hear them speak, it's the one I'm thinking of. She learned Spanish. If I heard her speak, I would think that was a native Spanish speaker. Then again, I don't speak Spanish, but to me, she sounds like a Spanish speaker. So maybe that's not a relevant point because I don't speak Spanish. But
but you're right. It talked about that in one of our readings this week, and I probably can't pinpoint it, but it does talk about like taking into account aptitude. And we can't just generalize that. That's my dad. Sorry, he distracted me. Yeah, we can't overgeneralize and say that like, oh, well, no one is going to be able to be fluent if they start as an adult. Like that's just unheard of. No, because there are cases that people are exceptional at learning languages and they can. So I think it's just kind of a general analysis. And I think some of these studies, like I kind of tried to bring that up in my PowerPoint. They're not even always the most accurate. Like they can't even always prove. Like they find like little problems in their own experiments, and they're like, well, it could be this or it could be this. So how do we? It's just hard. It's hard to know, honestly.
yeah, and that's going back to like what you said in the very beginning of your presentation, Betsy, is that like the study of second language acquisition is really hard and it's new, and we don't have any like super solid theories or anything yet. So that just makes another point of like it's hard.
Like think about it, like the first theories that we read about were like in the 50s, weren't they?
Yeah.
It's like it's only been what 70 years that we've been looking at this. Like that's not a long time.
No.
So how cool that we get to be a part of this process and actually think through some of this. But okay.
Anyway, back to the list.
Yeah, back to the list. So we're thinking critical period hypothesis is important.
Yeah.
Language
and
ego.
then we have
mentioned.
language ego.
I
Do
think
you want to put accent?
Yeah. Yeah, girl. I think accent must be mentioned. Okay. Let's see what else. Oh, implicit versus explicit. We all touched on that.
Yeah.
That's important.
I would almost say that's at the top.
I don't know. Let's think about it.
Let's think about everything that we, well, I, you know what? I might agree with you on that being at the top, because that kind of is the umbrella that all the others that we've been talking about, the implicit versus explicit. You know, the implicit is the critical period hypothesis, and then you have implicit and explicit for your language ego, and then your accent as an adult with your explicit learning. So I can see that kind of as the overall concept.
Well, because basically what it comes down to is like implicit versus explicit is adult and child, like child and adult, which is the whole point of this.
Way is learning their learning environments. Yeah.
So that's our whole point topic.
Yeah. So I would so
it is kind of top too. Yeah, I would think.
So if we put that, okay, we need one more. So we've got CPH, language ego, accent, implicit versus explicit. What was another thing that we would have touched on? I think those all three of mine are included. So do you guys have any other ones? One that none of us touched on, but I did think was interesting in our reading was they looked at the natural approach or natural theory, and they kind of compared it to the total physical approach, which was the idea of not having someone actually respond verbally, but like literally just like an action or like pointing. They used the experience saying of like, oh, point here. And if they could point to the right thing, they were understanding, but they just didn't verbalize it yet. I thought that was really interesting too. I was even thinking about like, how could I include that in my like teaching? Like that could be a fun game that we could do like with acting. So it's like in their bodies and they're like learning vocabulary. But I don't know if that's the one that we want to include. We might not want to, but I just don't know what else we can bring into this, honestly.
Well, you know, I highlighted this here. it was at the end of the Brown chapter about nature, and it was under the heading of issues in first language acquisition revisited. Yeah. And competence and performance, comprehension and production, nature or nurture. And that talked about accent. I know we were talking about, Betsy. I can't find it.
Oh,
though.
I just found it. In the Brown article.
Okay.
It's on page
Yes.
73.
73. I just hit it.
Yep. So it talks about, it kind of shows two different teaching methods, the natural physical response and then the natural approach. I combined the names a little bit. Yeah, but you knew what I was talking about.
Yeah.
Total physical approach or response. Yeah, so this is what they say about this approach. They say it's effective in the beginning levels of language proficiency, but unfortunately it kind of loses its distinctiveness as learners advance in their competence. Today, it is used more as a type of classroom activity, which is more useful way to view it. Many successful communicative, interactive classrooms utilize TPR activities to provide both auditory input and physical activity. So I think that could be really, another one. None of us touched on it because we could only pick 3, right? So I almost picked that one, but I ended up not putting it in my presentation. Where the natural approach, they say stimulated child language acquisition through the use of TPR activities. At the beginning level, everyday language situations were highlighted, like shopping, home, and health topics. But in advocating teacher-delivered comprehensible input, spoken language that is understandable to the learner or just a little beyond the learner's level, that's what they're talking about, the input. This method departed from strictly drawing insights from children's natural acquisition. And they say language learning is, after all, an interactive process. And we kind of did hit on this when we were talking about like trying to prepare, especially like our adult learners, like how to do things in the real world. Like how can they go to the store? How can they pay their bills? Like we've talked about this a little bit, I think even in the last 2 weeks, with the natural approach. So
Betsy, one thing that you mentioned, and Sarah and I talked about this in our 647 class, it was in that, what was that reading that we did last week that was on a PDF, Sarah, where it talked about like you can, where you can like take telephone messages, the tapestry one that we were talking about. You remember that? And how what you could do is you can use taking a message as a teaching tool, or writing a receipt as a teaching tool. So and how that social idea, or not idea, but that social situation where you have to take a message, and not only are you learning the language, but you also are learning the social context in which you answer hello, no, he's not here right now, and be polite and all that kind of good stuff that you normally do when you're taking a message.
Okay. I'm almost wondering. Yeah, because this is one of the claims of Krashen's theories. I'm just wondering, is this TP8 or TPR, or this total physical response, is the natural approach kind of underneath that? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Not necessarily. It just says at the beginning level, like you could use these activities to help.
I was about to say, I think they're kind of on par with each other myself.
Okay, I have another suggestion. You guys totally feel free to shut this down. I think maybe we could put language ego and accent kind of under the same category, because it kind of has to do with like someone's self-esteem and how they feel about like learning and, you know, outputting language. So I almost feel like you could put those under the same category, but then we include these two. So we include the total physical response, and then we include the natural theory, or the natural, is that how you say it?
Well, I think also with that, the total physical, it's hard to say, total physical response and natural approach kind of go together as well, because the natural approach uses total physical response, right? Like takes.
Yeah. So, or you could
They
say
could
the
both.
total for, yeah, the total for the, so let's say, for example, you're doing a game of Simon Says, right? And so you're using that physical response to play Simon Says, but it's that input, that natural input that Krashen talks about, and as part of his natural theory. You have that input, you have to listen and then do the physical thing as, sit down, stand up, touch toes, whatever.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think then? Should we pair those together instead?
Yeah, because I think language, ego, and accent are kind of like they do kind of go together,
Mhm.
but I think they're better separated.
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
All right, so our 5 points. Now let's do first, or well, I don't even know if we need to number them, do we? First to last, or we'll just do that in our paper, but
I would do implicit and explicit number 1.
I would too. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
And then I would do the critical period hypothesis is number 2.
Yes, that's what I was gonna say.
Then
And
language ego,
then,
maybe?
yeah,
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 exactly.
yeah,
And then I would say like total physical response,
yeah. I
natural
agree.
approach, and then
I agree.
accent.
I agree.
I almost think natural approach should come before total physical response
Yeah,
because we want them
okay.
to interact. So
Right.
I almost think, wait, do we have more than 5 right now?
I
1?
think we have
Yeah,
6.
I thought those were going
Shoot!
together.
Oh no, we have 6.
That's okay.
I thought we were gonna put I can't think of the acronym. Total physical response.
Oh, together, you guys. I'm
TPR
sorry.
and
You're right.
natural
You're
approach
right.
together.
I'm writing them
But we
down, but
can
I'm
also
screwing this up. Okay, so implicit versus explicit, 1. 2, we're saying CPH.
Mm-hmm.
3, language ego. 4, the natural approach and total response, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then 5 would be our accent.
Correct.
I like it. I think that sounds good. Yeah, and I think we've just talked enough about why we think that is. Why, so.
Good deal.
All right. Miss Early, thank you again for watching our long video. We appreciate you. We hope you enjoyed it. All right. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Yes. Alrighty.